The most dangerous thing about Joseph Stalin's DNA is not what it appears to reveal. It is what people today want it to reveal. A reported genetic test on one of his grandsons produced a paternal lineage strongly associated with the Caucasus, and as the claim spread online, a secret biography appeared. Some said the result proved Stalin was not Georgian. Others said it exposed an Ossetian father, destroyed his official family story, or explained the darkness of his rule. But the genetic evidence does none of those things. Its real message is narrower, older, and far more curious. One surviving chromosome points thousands of years into the Caucasus, while the identity of Stalin's own father remains unresolved. The reported result came not from Joseph Stalin's preserved body, but from Alexander Berdyansky, a theater director who was the son of Vasily Stalin and therefore an acknowledged grandson of the Soviet dictator. A Y chromosome profile attributed to Berdyansky was circulated as belonging to haplogroup G2A1A, sometimes described more specifically under later naming systems as a branch of G2A1A1. If the sample, family relationship, and reported profile are all correct, Berdyansky inherited that Y chromosome from Vasily, Vasily inherited it from Stalin, and Stalin received it from his biological father. That sounds decisive. But there is an immediate problem. The full test was not published as a peer-reviewed study with a laboratory report, methods, independent replication, and documented chain of custody. That limitation remains central. The result is widely repeated in genetic genealogy databases and historical discussions, and its marker pattern is consistent with a Caucasus-associated branch of haplogroup G. Yet it should be described as a reported result, not as the same level of evidence produced when authenticated remains are sampled by multiple laboratories. Scientists did not open Stalin's tomb, extract DNA from his bones, and sequence his genome. No complete Stalin genome has been published. What exists is a male line inference through a grandson. It may be correct, and it fits the geography remarkably well. But responsible history begins by stating what the evidence is before asking what it means. That careful distinction makes the mystery stronger, not weaker. Stalin controlled one of the most secretive states in modern history. His government rewrote photographs, altered biographies, restricted archives, and shaped public memory with extraordinary force. Yet the private biological history of the man at the center of that system remained strangely uncertain. He was born Joseph Bessarionis Jughashvili in Gori, Georgia, in December 1878, to Ekaterine Geladze, commonly called Kiki, and her husband Bessarion Jughashvili, known as Beso. Church records place the family within Georgian Orthodox Christianity. The child grew up speaking Georgian, studied at religious schools, and entered revolutionary politics from the borderlands of the Russian Empire. Those facts are solid. The uncertainty begins when the family story moves from documents to whispers. Beso was a cobbler whose business declined as the household fractured. Accounts of Stalin's childhood describe poverty, alcohol, violence, separation, and recurring conflict between his parents. Later, biographers recorded rumors that Beso might not have been the boy's biological father. These rumors were not supported by a birth certificate naming someone else or by a surviving confession. They were stories repeated by relatives, neighbors, political enemies, and later historians examining an unusually secretive family. The fact that a rumor existed does not make it true. But the persistence of several different candidates shows how quickly uncertainty gathered around the young boy who would later become the most powerful figure in the Soviet Union. The most famous candidate was Nikolai Przewalski, the Russian explorer whose broad face and heavy mustache were later said to resemble Stalin's. The theory became irresistible to people who preferred dramatic hidden bloodlines. A celebrated imperial explorer secretly fathers a future revolutionary dictator in provincial Georgia. It sounded like history designed by a novelist. The chronology, however, does not cooperate. Serious biographical work has not placed Przewalski in the necessary location at the necessary time, and there's no credible documentary evidence of a relationship with Kika. Facial resemblance is especially weak evidence. Hair, mustaches, lighting, age, and expectation can make unrelated men appear connected. The Przewalski theory survives because it is memorable, not because it is strong. A more plausible but still unproved possibility involves Yakov, often called Koba Egnatashvili, a prosperous Gori figure who assisted Keke and her son. Historian Simon Sebag Montefiore considered the possibility that Egnatashvili could have been Stalin's biological father, while also emphasizing that certainty is impossible. Members of the Egnatashvili family later remained close to Stalin, which added fuel to speculation. But support, affection, and continued access are not genetic evidence. In a poor community, a better-positioned family friend could become a protector without being a secret parent. No authenticated DNA comparison between Stalin's paternal descendants and Ignatashvili's male-line descendants has publicly resolved the question. This is where the Y chromosome result becomes both useful and frustrating. A Y chromosome moves from father to son with relatively few changes. If Berdansky's reported profile truly represents Stalin's paternal line, it can exclude a proposed father whose male-line DNA belongs to a completely incompatible haplogroup, but it cannot choose between several men from the same region who might share related paternal lineages. Haplogroup G and its Caucasus branches occur among Georgian, Ossetian, Abkhazian, and other regional populations. If Beso and Ignatashvili both belong to compatible branches, the reported result would look convincing under either family story. The chromosome can reveal a deep route while remaining silent about the final name on the path. To understand why, imagine a family tree with thousands of branches. Your Y chromosome follows only one thin line, your father, his father, his father, and so on. Every generation adds many other ancestors, but the Y chromosome ignores almost all of them. 10 generations back, a person can have hundreds of genealogical ancestors, yet a Y DNA test represents only one paternal chain. It does not summarize a person's complete ancestry, personality, intelligence, culture, or nationality. If Stalin's reported lineage was G2A1A, that describes one ancient male line. It does not mean his entire genome was G2A, because genomes do not belong to haplogroups in that simple way. Haplogroup G is a branch of the human Y chromosome family tree that probably developed somewhere in West Asia, close to the Caucasus, eastern Anatolia, Armenia, or western Iran. Researchers studying its modern diversity have argued that this broad region preserves several deep branches, making it a likely center in the early history of the lineage. Over thousands of years, different descendants moved in different directions. Some remained around the Caucasus. Others traveled into Anatolia, the Near East, the Mediterranean, and Europe. The lineage became associated with one of the greatest transformations in human history, but it never belonged to a single modern nation. Ancient DNA revealed that forms of G2A were common among many early farmers who moved from Anatolia into Europe during the Neolithic period. These communities carried agriculture, domesticated animals, new settlement patterns, and expanding village life into regions previously occupied mainly by hunter-gatherers. Men with G2A lineages appear in ancient remains from Central, Southern, and Western Europe. The famous alpine mummy known as Otzi belonged to a branch of G2A. This does not mean every G2A man descends directly from Otzi or that the lineage invented agriculture. Haplogroups spread through populations containing many families, and cultural revolutions are created by communities, not chromosomes. Later migrations changed Europe's paternal landscape. During the late Neolithic and Bronze Age, populations carrying substantial steppe ancestry moved westward and became highly influential across much of the continent. Several Y chromosome lineages expanded dramatically during and after these movements, while G2A became less frequent in many European regions. The branch most often attributed to Stalin is especially associated with the Caucasus. Published population studies have found high frequencies of particular G subclades among some North Ossetian groups and substantial frequencies among other communities in the region, but this fact is frequently exaggerated. Viral accounts sometimes claim that almost every Ossetian man carries the exact Stalin lineage, or that the result mathematically proves an Ossetian identity. Frequencies vary by sample, location, and subclade. Haplogroup G as a whole is not the same as G2A1A, and G2A1A is not the same as every later branch beneath it. Population genetics depends on precise labels, not dramatic shortcuts. Even a lineage strongly concentrated among Ossetians would not automatically make Stalin ethnically Ossetian. Ethnicity is formed through language, upbringing, family identification, community, politics, and history. Genes can reveal shared ancestry between populations, but they do not issue national identity cards. Stalin was born and raised in a Georgian-speaking Orthodox environment, and publicly understood himself as Georgian while operating within a wider Russian and Soviet political world. A remote paternal ancestor may have been Ossetian, Georgian, or part of a community that later changed language and identity. The Caucasus has always contained movement across valleys, villages, imperial borders, and cultural boundaries. The surname Jughashvili has therefore attracted enormous attention. The ending Shvili is Georgian and means child or son. The origin of the root Juga is disputed. Some historians and linguists have considered an Ossetian connection possible, linking the name to forms found among Ossetians. Others note Georgian explanations and warn that surname etymology is uncertain. What can be rejected is the Internet claim that Jughashvili means son of a Jew and secretly proves Jewish ancestry. Historians consulted in modern fact-checking have found no credible evidence that Stalin was Jewish, and the surname does not carry that meaning. The uncertainty is Caucasian and linguistic, not proof of a hidden religious bloodline. The newest ancient DNA research from the Southern Caucasus makes the background richer. A major 2025 study analyzed genome-wide data from hundreds of ancient individuals from present-day Georgia and Armenia, covering roughly 5,000 years from the Bronze Age into the early medieval period. It found substantial genetic continuity alongside repeated movement and mixture from neighboring regions, including ancestry connected to Anatolia, Iran, and the Eurasian steppe. The Caucasus was not an untouched biological vault sealed from history. It was a crossroads whose populations could remain regionally connected while absorbing newcomers and participating in wide networks of trade, migration, warfare, and cultural change. If Stalin's paternal line belonged to a Caucasus-centered branch of G2A, it fits naturally within that deep history. It suggests that one of his direct male ancestors came from a lineage with a long regional presence. It may be consistent with Georgian origins, an Ossetian connection, or movement between those communities. But the timescale is crucial. A haplogroup can be thousands of years older than modern ethnic labels. Georgian and Ossetian identities have real histories, but G2A branches began long before the modern boundaries and national categories used today. A prehistoric lineage cannot be owned by one 20th century political identity. The test also says nothing directly about Stalin's mother. Keke contributed half of her son's autosomal DNA and his mitochondrial DNA, yet the reported grandson test focused on the paternal Y chromosome. Because Alexander Berdyansky descended through Stalin's son Vasily, His mitochondrial DNA came through other women and cannot represent Keki's maternal line. Without authenticated samples from Stalin or carefully identified maternal relatives, claims about his complete ancestry remain speculative. Describing him as genetically, almost entirely, one ancient Caucasus type goes far beyond the evidence. One paternal marker is a single thread, not the whole fabric. This matters because genetic stories about famous rulers often slide from lineage into destiny. Sensational accounts often try to connect Stalin's ancient ancestry, childhood uncertainty, paranoia, surveillance system, ethnic policies, and mass violence as if DNA had exposed one psychological chain. That is not responsible for genetics or history. No haplogroup causes dictatorship. No Caucasus lineage creates suspicion, cruelty, administrative skill, or political terror. Millions of men can share remote paternal ancestry while living completely different lives. Stalin's rule must be explained through ideology, institutions, war, revolution, personal decisions, political struggle, and the opportunities created by the Soviet system, not through a Y chromosome. Childhood can influence personality, but historians must also resist turning every rumor into a diagnosis. Stalin experienced poverty, family conflict, paternal violence, illness, and the instability of imperial Georgia. Those experiences mattered. Yet modern biographers disagree on how directly the child predicts the dictator. Stephen Kotkin has warned against easy psychoanalysis that invents private motives where evidence is absent. A person who suffered violence does not inevitably become violent, and uncertain paternity does not inevitably produce an obsession with secret files. The later police state was built by a political movement, an ideology, institutions, crises, and many participants. Reducing it to a wounded boy creates a dramatic story at the cost of historical reality. The names Stalin chose are also often misread as genetic clues. As a young revolutionary, Jughashvili became known as Koba. The name did not primarily come from Koba Ignatashvili, the man later rumored to be his biological father. It came from the hero of Alexandre Kazbegi's Georgian novel, The Patricide, a romantic outlaw associated with loyalty, vengeance, and resistance. The young radical identified with that character and carried the nickname into underground politics. Later, he adopted Stalin, built from the Russian word for steel, and commonly understood as man of steel. These names reveal deliberate self-fashioning, but they do not prove he was hiding his ethnicity or father. The reported DNA result has also been used to claim that Stalin was not European. That question imposes a modern continental box on a region famous for resisting simple classification. The Caucasus stands between the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, linking Eastern Europe and Western Asia. Georgia is culturally, politically, and historically connected to multiple worlds. Population genetics shows ancestry relationships across the Caucasus, Anatolia, Iran, the steppe, and Europe. Asking whether one Y lineage is purely European or Asian usually reveals more about the categories than the person. Human migrations did not stop at the lines later drawn on school maps. What then would be required to verify the result more strongly? The ideal investigation would begin with a documented sample from Stalin himself, collected under controlled conditions and tested independently by several accredited ancient DNA or forensic laboratories. Researchers would examine both the Y chromosome and the autosomal genome, verify contamination controls, publish methods, and compare the result with known relatives. That kind of project would create ethical, political, and legal controversy. Stalin was buried in Moscow after his body was removed from Lenin's mausoleum in 1961. There is no publicly established plan to exhume him for genomic research. A less dramatic approach could test several unquestioned male-line descendants of Stalin's acknowledged sons, provided they gave informed consent. Matching detailed Y chromosome sequences would strengthen the reconstruction of Stalin's paternal profile, Researchers could then test documented male line relatives from the Jughashvili family. If those profiles matched closely, the case for Bezos' biological paternity would become much stronger. If they differed clearly, the official paternal line would face a serious challenge. Testing potential Ignatashvili descendants could provide another comparison, although family records, non-paternity events, and privacy concerns would complicate interpretation. No single commercial test should carry the entire conclusion. Full Y chromosome sequencing would also improve the ancient story. Older tests often used short tandem repeats, repeating DNA segments that mutate at measurable but variable rates. These profiles can predict a haplogroup, but modern sequencing identifies many single nucleotide changes and can place a lineage more precisely on the paternal tree. A refined branch might show whether Stalin's line clusters most closely with a particular regional group or family. Even then, it would provide probabilities and relationships, not an ethnic verdict. Populations overlap, samples remain incomplete, and a line can move geographically without changing its Y marker. The paternity mystery, therefore, remains open. Bezos Jughashvili is the documented father and should not be displaced merely because later writers found alternatives more dramatic. Przewalski is unsupported and chronologically implausible. Ignatashvili is possible in the limited sense that historians have discussed, but possibility is not proof. The reported haplogroup fits the broader Caucasus and cannot distinguish among plausible local men without comparative DNA. Anyone announcing that genetics has finally named Stalin's secret father is claiming a result that the available evidence does not provide. There is another irony, but it must be framed carefully. Stalin's government classified citizens by nationality, deported entire populations, manipulated borders, and treated some ethnic communities as collective security threats. The dictator himself came from one of the world's most linguistically and historically complex border regions. His paternal line, if the reported test is correct, may cross categories later treated as politically sharp. This does not expose hypocrisy through biology. People do not need mixed ancestry to make ethnic persecution wrong, but it does demonstrate how poorly rigid political labels capture the long movement of actual families. The ancient G2A connection remains fascinating when it is described honestly. A small section of Stalin's DNA may have linked him through an uninterrupted father-to-son chain to men who lived in West Asia or the Caucasus, thousands of years before states, communism, Russia, or Georgia existed. Related branches traveled with early farming populations and appear in prehistoric European graves. Other branches remained near the mountains. Across countless generations, fathers passed the chromosome to sons without knowing the history hidden inside it. Eventually, one version may have reached a cobbler's household in Gori and then entered the family of a ruler who transformed the 20th century. But that chromosome did not carry a plan for revolution. It did not contain collectivization, the Great Terror, wartime command, deportations, or the Cold War. Genes construct biological systems. They do not write political programs. The danger of celebrity genetics is that a technical label can feel like a final explanation. G2A1A sounds precise, and precision creates authority. Yet the more carefully the result is examined, the more modest its true meaning becomes. It identifies a paternal neighborhood in the human family tree. It does not explain the man who inherited it. The reported test also cannot confirm the popular online claim that Stalin deliberately erased his ancestry. Soviet biographies certainly polished and manipulated his life. His official birth year was often presented as 1879 rather than the 1878 date found in the church record. Propaganda transformed an impoverished Georgian revolutionary into an almost mythic leader. But there is no clear evidence that Stalin knew a genetic secret about an Ossetian father and built state propaganda specifically to conceal it. He publicly remained recognizable as Georgian, retained relationships with Georgian associates, and never became physically or culturally indistinguishable from the Russian majority he ruled. Even the idea of a single Caucasian genetic signature is misleading. Genome-wide studies show major variation within the region, shaped by geography, language, marriage practices, and historical contacts. A Y lineage frequent in North Ossetia can also appear among neighboring populations at lower rates. Maternal lines may show a different pattern. Autosomal ancestry combines thousands of ancestors and often crosses the same boundaries that paternal markers appear to emphasize. Stalin's complete genome, if ever sequenced, would almost certainly reveal multiple ancestral streams rather than one pure mountain lineage. This is why the 2025 Southern Caucasus study is so important. It replaced the image of total isolation with a history of continuity and connection. Ancient people related to later regional populations lived through Bronze Age networks, steppe movement, imperial expansions, and the growth of towns. New ancestry entered, but it did not erase everything already present. Stalin's reported paternal line belongs within that pattern. Persistence without purity. The chromosome may be old in the region, yet the people carrying it changed languages, identities, political loyalties, and family connections many times. The most surprising result is therefore not a secret nationality. It is the survival of one tiny biological signal through an almost unimaginable chain of ordinary lives. Every man in that chain had to have a son who eventually continued the line. Wars, disease, famine, accidents, migration, and social upheaval could have ended it at any point. The lineage survived not because it was destined to produce Stalin, but because countless unrelated historical chances preserved it. Population genetics can see the surviving branch. It cannot see all the brother lines that disappeared. Still, the unresolved personal question remains. Did Stalin believe Beso was his biological father? Did he hear the rumors about Ignatashvili or Przewalski? And did he care? The available record cannot enter his private mind with certainty. Historians can identify rumors, family relationships, letters, memoirs, and later recollections, but silence is not proof of a hidden wound. Stalin left an enormous political archive and relatively little honest self-reflection. That absence invites speculation, especially because his public image was so controlled. Yet the responsible answer may remain the least satisfying one. We do not know. DNA often appears to promise an escape from that uncertainty. A laboratory number seems harder than memory and cleaner than rumor. But genetic evidence has its own limits. Samples can be misidentified. Family trees can contain undocumented paternity. Haplogroup names change as the Y chromosome tree is refined. Commercial databases may repeat claims without preserving original documentation. Statistical associations can be transformed into ethnic certainties by people who do not understand them. The Stalin result is a perfect example of why historical genetics needs both scientific caution and archival discipline. If the Berdansky profile is authentic, the strongest conclusion is simple. Stalin's direct paternal line belonged to a branch of haplogroup G deeply rooted in the Caucasus and found at particularly high frequencies in some regional populations. That result is compatible with his documented Georgian background and with possible older Ossetian connections. It does not identify his biological father, map his full ancestry, prove that he concealed a secret ethnicity, or explain his political behavior. The science narrows one line while leaving the most sensational questions open. That is more than enough to create a remarkable story. A ruler who tried to control historical memory left behind a paternal signal he could not edit. The signal travels beyond Soviet archives, beyond the Russian Empire, beyond written history, into the prehistoric movements that shaped the Caucasus and carried early farmers toward Europe. Yet the same signal stops just before answering the question people most want resolved. It reaches Gori, reaches the generation of Stalin's birth, and then divides into competing names. Beso, Egnatashvili. A rumor about an explorer. DNA points toward the region, but it cannot point toward the room. The final truth is almost the opposite of the viral claim. Genetics did not unmask Joseph Stalin as a completely different person. It placed one part of him exactly where the historical record already placed his family, in the deeply connected populations of the Caucasus. The surprise lies in the age of that paternal thread and in the complexity hidden beneath labels such as Georgian and Ossetian. His ancestry was not a secret code explaining tyranny. It was an ordinary human inheritance passing through an extraordinary and catastrophic life, and so the unanswered question survives. Somewhere in the Caucasus, male-line relatives of the men connected to Stalin's childhood may still carry chromosomes capable of strengthening or breaking the official family story. A future carefully documented comparison could reveal whether Beso's paternal line matches the reported profile from Stalin's grandson. Until that happens, the most honest conclusion is also the most haunting. Science may have followed Stalin's father line across thousands of years and entire prehistoric migrations, yet it still cannot tell us with certainty which man in one small Georgian town gave that chromosome to the child who became Stalin.